No matter what happens or how much time passes, we will never, never accept your kind, monster!
If racism is going to be a major element in your story, don't introduce it in like the last 3 seasons. Also, by far the most interesting way to portray racism in a work of fiction is to have one of the main characters who is supposed to be a good guy have at least racial biases. Not only does it add complexity to their character and a very clear arc for them to have, but it adds validity to the concept behind the bigotry. Because it shows pretty fucking clearly that there are massive bigots in your setting. If you want a good example of what I'm talking about, Ingrid from Fire Emblem Three Houses. She is explicitly racist. And that's already a storyline in which many background characters are shown with racial biases at the very least, if not complete outright bigotry. I understand why so many writers would be scared to do that, because on the surface, it makes you think that the character cannot be good in any way. And that's the case if you're a bad writer. If you can't have them have an arc of any kind in that regard, that's your own damn fault.
Again! Secure the perimeter!
Don't get pushed back! Pull a path through them!
Standing in their way
So,
were a few heroes and whatever police could be spared.
do people violently rise up when you oppress them? Yeah, no shit. Do they turn to a guy who completely destroys entire cities just for the sake of doing it? Correct me if I'm wrong, but no. Pretty much anyone who has ever violently risen against oppression has done it with a specific target, either in terms of a group or a leader or a group of leaders or something like that. They don't just join a death cult. It'd be like if a black man was a victim of police brutality and instead of joining like a Black Lives Matter movement or if they start following the ACAB stuff or stuff like that. If it'd be like if instead they joined the Church of Satan and bombed orphanages and hospitals. I understand that sounds like a bit of a stretch, but like they're siding with the guy who disintegrated an entire fucking city, as well as the guy who caused All Might to fucking retire. Like, if there was a separate group that was focused on heteromorph equality and that stuff, and they sided with them, and they used violent means for that, like, sure, absolutely, I'd believe that. And if they had developed the racism subplot better, then I would be on their side. But, like, there's not many good comparisons in the real world because there's not many people who have come to power who destroyed stuff solely for the sake of doing it. Even people like Hitler, technically speaking, he had reasons. It wasn't like he just loved the act of destroying. He was a supremacist. He didn't just raze entire cities to the ground just 'cause. He might have raised like Jewish villages and stuff, but like I feel like this is the equivalent of Hitler bombing the capital of Germany. That's the type of person that I feel like would be equivalent to what's happening here. Okay, I'm going to continue. I feel like the point's made.
A group of 200 against an army.
We knew we'd be facing a mob. How the hell did they get so organized?
Can he lock
What,
clothing?
control us? No one who looks human knows how we feel.
I love how they just had the races and the comments about the racism being made to the only black character in the show. Okay, not the only one. There's also Mirko, but she's more tan than black.
But we know that these are shams! ways they can pretend to help those who look.
The coloration of a lot of these guys looks closer to what the police outfits look like. And that makes them seem like they way outnumber the police look like they way outnumber the army.
The 6-6 incident, the Great Jeddah Purge. From the beginning, the paranormal has led to the persecution of those who are different.
You're gonna reference events we've never fucking heard of? It's not just me, right? It looks like the police outnumber them massively.
Worship Thor and why don't fight for us? He is the one who...
So, not only is the racism undeveloped, not only is Spinner undeveloped, not only is this entire shit undeveloped, that's all stuff they should have done earlier in the show. With Spinner as a spokesperson specifically, that is underdeveloped and was introduced within this last season and a half, probably. In that time frame, they introduced a concept that would be massively important and did nothing with it.
Becomes a reality.
I feel like making Spinner so monstrous.
The League of Villains are true comrades.
Having your racism metaphor involve animal people is already kind of weird, given that, you know, black people were viewed as animals. It's a little bit weird to have the analogy be with human animals. That's a choice in general. But then to make the leader of like the resistance group that represents the people who are fighting against the racism stuff, like to make him completely monstrous and deformed. I know I'm white and probably shouldn't express my opinion on this, but I can't imagine people are like satisfied with how this is being handled. This feels incredibly disrespectful to the point of being like 2 or 3 steps away from actual fucking racism. When you literally portray the oppressed group as monstrous, I feel like your analogy is a little bit questionable.
Know what man is saying. Ever since I got new power from All For One.
And he's also low intelligence and only partially coherent. Can we stop having people who haven't experienced oppression of a certain kind write about that kind of oppression? I'm sure someone will try to argue that it's not supposed to be an actual analogy for real racism or whatever, but like, this is one of those things that's so heavily charged as a concept in real life that you can't have it in a story without having it be an analogy for real life. Like, you just can't. And if you're not one of the marginalized groups, maybe at least run how you're writing it by one of those groups first.
Heteromorphs should be kept in cages.
You're impure.
You tricked us into letting you
Defile our land!
What does any of what you think have to do with attacking a hospital of all places? When the heroes were investigating Jakku.
None of them thought of that! I don't know if I'll ever rewatch this show, but I feel like if I do, I'm either going to stop after episode 4 of this season or after the season 6 penultimate. Because stuff had issues before then, but I feel like this is just egregious. I swear to fucking Christ, if they're going to go with the angle of Shoji had a positive relationship with a human in the past, And because of that, they shouldn't rise up against their oppressors. If that's the fucking angle they go for, one of the problems with how a lot of media portrays racism is that they portray violence as the wrong way to escape oppression. Here's the thing, though. It's needed. You think slaves stopped being slaves because people changed their fucking minds? You think a monologue changed that? When you are being violently oppressed, sure, the Martin Luther King Jr. approach is very respectable and noble and admirable. What happened to him? When you oppress people, they will rise against you. The deaths caused by any violent revolution against the oppressor could have been prevented only by the oppressor. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. You cannot violently oppress people for years on end without something happening against you. If you think you can, get ready. Freedom is not won through peace and diplomacy, especially against a group that hates. If there is a sense of hatred from one group to another, diplomacy is almost guaranteed to never work. When that hatred leads to violent oppression, diplomacy will just never work. Let's see what he has to say, though.
Hospital. The first thing they did was make sure the patients and staff were safe. They kept every person there out of harm's way and protected innocent bystanders.
What you talking about? You, a plan? What hell wrong with this guy?
That kid looks messed up.
You see his scars?
Well, yeah, but still. Tell him, leader! You laid the plan out before! We're destroying everything that persecuted us!
We'll do whatever you say!
If you wanted to have the racism subplot as a thing that you are going to develop later on, literally just have Shoji unmask at any fucking point in the entire story.
What you're doing here will set us back 30 years.
Oh, League? I played that too. By myself, though.
Stop! Enough!
As if the writing couldn't get any worse, the villains we're supposed to feel sympathy for, at least to some regard, are League of Legends players. Kill him, please.
Our fearless leader's bravery gives us the courage to strike against our oppressors. Become martyrs for our cause. Any blood spilled on this day will bring rights to future heteromorphs!
This can't be happening!
This is almost as bad as how Ruby handles racism. Like, holy shit. This is horrendous. I genuinely think this is the worst the series has ever been. And for what is, as incels would put it, an extremely woke show, this feels like, what's the word? Virtue signaling. Most anime have some sexism, so that's kind of one of those things you almost get used to with it. But almost being racist is new. This is exactly accurate, looking at what other people feel about this. It really bothers me that Horikoshi suddenly went, hey guys, now we're going to talk about systemic racism in my fictional world. It's a really big deal in this setting. Sorry for barely mentioning this in the past 372 chapters. No big deal, right? Have fun. Yup, that is exactly how I'm feeling. Yup, you cannot just drop the racism storyline in the middle of the final battle. Yup, exactly. Yup, respectability politics. Yup, Shoji screaming, you're going to set us back 30 years. Yes. Yup, consisting of people who have a right to be angry and fed up with the system. If the heroes win, nothing will change. Yup, that is correct when Spinner says that. I fundamentally disagree with the framing Horikoshi chose to present this theme, a theme of bad, violent rioters who are actually racist against the majority, who were then quelled by the representatives of the state, portrayed as heroes. Yup! This dude is fucking nailing it. Something J.K. Rowling would have written. Abso-fucking-lutely. The face of the minority movement is a beast-like, drolling brute who can't speak properly and who doesn't truly care about the people he represents. Do I even need to explain what's the issue here? Thank you! We have now fought together and our friend society is healed. Yup. It's crazy how in the current state of the anime we haven't gotten a hint about mutant prejudice besides some random villain cult that the League specifically targeted, because no one would notice them gone. And apparently the storyline will get introduced right at the final battle. Hell, Shoji should have gotten some seeds about it here or there. Yup. Actually, let's look up Class 1A real quick to see who is a heteromorph. Okay, let's see. We got, in Class 1A alone, we have Mina. Asui is human passing enough that I wouldn't say it. Kota, Shoji, Tokoyami. A definite argument could be made for Hagakure. That's 5 of 20 that are heteromorphs in that class. Not a single mention. All right, let's check Class 1B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At least. There's an argument to be made for other ones. So out of 40, that's 12 that are heteromorphs. Even if it is believable to handle the societal issues, it won't feel relevant. Yep. These issues are not big enough and not represented enough. Society largely functions overwhelmingly completely fine, and these issues are only there to exclusively for the villains and heroes that address them and are never shown affecting anyone else. They feel extremely small and detached issues rather than big societal problems, so hand wave it to, oh yeah, no worries, that ain't happening anymore is just all too easy and believable. Just unsatisfying. Mutant discrimination is the most blatant example, since it was even more contradictory to the setting we got to know than the others, to the point it needed explanation on why it didn't affect more characters we know, explanation that already handwaves the solution away. Oh yeah, of course there are no traces of heteromorphic discrimination anywhere we've seen the manga. It only happens in backwater towns. The city's already got rid of it via the wonders of education. Yup, that makes sense. I find this post incredibly ironic now, because generally I would say that X-Men 97 has a lot of issues. The racism plotline was not really one of them for me. And the portrayal of Magneto as being kind of based, like, yeah, interesting. Horikoshi faced racist allegations following Chapter 370 leaks. Damn. I'm not really sure I'd argue with that. Yeah, I mean, obviously you got Shoto and Dabi using arguably derogatory terms towards heteromorphs, like Shoto calling the dog policeman mutt, and Dabi always referring to Spinner by lizard. I'm going to tell you that society is extremely racist towards some quirks, but I'll show you 99% of people are very accepting. Yep, that is what I was talking about with Three Houses. Having Ingrid be racist towards the people of Duscur added so goddamn much validity to the argument. And the entire concept behind the tragedy of Duscur causing so much racism, you constantly see people talking about the tragedy itself, as well as background extras referring to Dedue as a suspicious or untrustworthy character. Dedue tells Byleth that they shouldn't stay around him because of the fact that people spread rumors. You shouldn't be around a man of Duscur. That is indication that there is racism. And it's both showing how people who are a victim of it respond to how those around them respond to it, and shows people who are perpetrating it, even when they think they're in the right. Ingrid is conflicted at best early on. Yes, this was the exact fucking problem with Stain. All heroes are false fakes who only care about money and fame. Pan to the heroes fighting back the Nomu at Hosu City and risking their lives to defend the innocent and limit the destruction. Let's count all the heroes out there who really only care about money and fame. Mount Lady. That's it. And never wasn't interested in money and fame. He was interested in power and being the best. And he still wants to be respected as a hero because that means he is the best. Ochako, there's an argument to be made, but she's wanting to help people by getting money for them. I don't think that fucking counts. I would have completely forgotten that heteromorphic discrimination was a thing in this universe if me and my sister didn't have our own discussions on it. I knew other readers completely forgot about it until we had the Shoji Koda backstory brought it up again. Especially with how it was put into the background when a quarter of the Class A could have faced. Lip service, an attempt at making the series seem deeper than it is. Absolutely. The inevitable confrontation between Shoji and Spinner. It's going to be trash. It's pretty obvious that Horikoshi is going to set up Shoji to confront Spinner about mutant racism. However, there's just a tiny problem with this. You see, MHA loves to do this thing where it loves to talk about how hero society is trash and has many problems, but fails to deliver on showing any of these so-called problems. Mutant racism is a big example of this, since we literally never see it happen in the story, even though the story tries to make you believe it does. The only time we ever get close to seeing it was the Creature Rejection Clan. However, even then they only show up one time throughout the story, and during that time they get immediately killed by League of Villains. The same is sadly true for Shoji and Spinner. Funny thing about Spinner is that even though he constantly says that he was discriminated in the past, and the fact that almost all the League of Villains get a large amount of flashbacks to show their past, we never actually see the on-screen example or flashback of him getting discriminated. So ultimately, if Shoji and Spinner actually do mean to talk about racism, it's going to be really forced. But hey, who knows if it's actually going to happen? Maybe I'm just talking out of my ass, and these two are going to do something completely different. Nothing is certain. But I do know if it does happen, it will be poor. 2 years ago, we've seen it multiple times in Vigilante. If Shoji fights Spinner over this, it would be terrible, though. I won't deny it. A lot of people on the sub that don't read Vigilante. Oh, they're arguing that we have seen the racism in Vigilante. You shouldn't have to read an entirely different manga to see an in-universe societal issue that apparently so bad it turned someone into a terrorist. You need to read chapter 222, because, especially this page here, because mutant racism is something that is almost gone. The Creature Rejection Clan being called a modern-day fossil, so it is something almost extinct, and the MHA world was already progressive and accepting towards mutant people, so we don't see that kind of racism because it's rare to do that and not the norm anymore. Is that right? This aged very well. In chapter 22, other page here, Spinner specifically says he was from a backwater place that was stuck in the last century, so it must make sense that mutant racism must still exist a bit, even if they're still living fossil there, but majority of MHA world are already progressive. That's what, yeah, sure. I think it is a very similar problem to Ruby. I think it's more pronounced because this is actually getting more focus, which is actually making it worse, in my opinion, in some regards. The overall handling of it in Ruby is unbelievably worse, with the only real representative of resistance to the oppression being a misogynistic, bigoted, psychopathic murderer. That's the only representation of resistance to racist oppression. And in that show, one of the main characters does start out as racist, and she ends up getting all virtue signally by the end. The biggest downside of doing reactions is that with episodes like this, where I'm just miserable watching them, I can't just speed it up. This is the episode that I'd usually watch at 1.5 or 2 times speed on my own, because this is just bad.
After I came in contact with one of them, they banded together to beat me. Said it was a blood purification. Tokoyami, Koda, and the rest of you from cities might only know.
Add this to the list of flashbacks that should have happened 4 fucking seasons ago. Also, why is he the only one? Tokoyami and Koda are more noticeable.
Know about this from books, but In some towns, there are still people who don't hesitate to scar children like me.
If there is anywhere in the world where people beat up children because of racist beliefs, racism is still deeply and fundamentally rooted into the overall society. Even if in cities it's not, the most blatant stuff. This is the problem with a lot of racism and how it's portrayed in fiction. People who don't experience racism view it as just being violent to people for their race. That's not what racism is. Racism is deep-seated prejudices against people. It's the black people make up a smaller part of the population, but they commit the most crimes type of people. It's the assumption that because police officers shot a woman in her sleep, she must have been a threat. Mina also should have absolutely been the victim of racism. If that's how you're going to go with the story, then she absolutely should have been. I would argue she and Tokoyami are the most blatant in this regard. Koda and Shoji are pretty obvious as well, but they're still human colored at least. She has horns, pink skin, black eyes, and Tokoyami's got a fucking bird for his head.
But disparity is still far too common.
Oh crap! I think I...
Far too common. You're the only one who's fucking dealt with it in the entire main cast!
I've also seen the list people compile. The ones that point out which heroes they think look more like villains. We should be able to talk about stuff like this freely. The thing is...
Hey, if you want to bring up that list, maybe don't make it implied that Endeavor is number one. Actually, no, I don't even think that was implied. I'm pretty sure that was revealed in, a side panel or something. We know from a Horikoshi interview that Endeavor is second on this ranking in universe. Interesting. It's almost like Horikoshi doesn't fucking know how to write racism.
Since I'm a heteromorph who has scars, people make assumptions. I hide them, so people don't think I'm fueled by revenge.
From what we've seen, he's been wearing a mask for a very long time. Who is making these assumptions? Show us! Do not tell us!
That takes real strength. I've been through plenty of hard times in my life.
Also, when the fuck did this happen? When? When do they just get around at their dorm to talk about fucking racism? I hate that one of the things I'm incredibly critical of Attack on Titan Season 2 for doing is happening here. Where scenes that had no reason to not be shown prior are now being done as flashbacks to develop a concept after the fact, instead of just letting things develop naturally over the course of the story.
But... I don't want to dwell on bad memories.
Racism's not a bad memory. The events that it causes are, but the people who caused those events that are the bad memories are still around and they're still bigoted. This is horrendous. I think I've spent an hour on this one episode, and I have half of it left.
I'll cling to the one good memory I have. And my body was useful.
If you only have one good memory of how people treated you, that speaks to a deep systemic problem with your society.
These issues have been a problem for over 100 years. A single generation can't make everything better.
That is
For
the
that reason,
only thing that's accurate about
I
any of
make
this.
sure the world I leave behind is better than the one I know now.
The fuck?
I face persecution just like you! Nothing can justify how...
That last thing he said before we sang now is the only accurate thing in this show. Racism is so deeply rooted in a society that no one generation can take it out. We'd be lucky if 10 generations could completely root it out.
But this isn't going to help our cause! Destroy every day!
Think about how you're using your anger! The choices you're making! You know what it's like to be hurt! Because people have hurt you!
We've tried to forgive and forget, but look,
This is literally just fucking Ruby! This is exactly how the confrontation with Adam goes in Season 5. Exactly! To those of you who might disagree with what I've said about violence sometimes being necessary to fight against oppression, hear the words of Nelson fucking Mandela. Having said this, I must deal immediately and at some length with the question of violence. Some of the things so far told to the court are true and some are untrue. I do not, however, deny that I planned sabotage. I did not plan it in a spirit of recklessness, nor because I have any love of violence. I planned it as a result of calm and sober assessment of the political situation that had arisen after many years of tyranny, exploitation, and oppression of my people by the whites. I admit immediately that I was one of the persons who helped to form Uncanto Sizwe, pardon me for my pronunciation, and that I played a prominent role in its affairs until I was arrested in August in 1962. For context, that was considered a terrorist organization. I have already mentioned that I was one of the persons who helped to form Uncanto. I and the others who started in the organization did so for two reasons. Firstly, we believed that as a result of government policy, violence by the African people had become inevitable, and that unless responsible leadership was given to canalize and control the feelings of our people, there would be outbreaks of terrorism which would produce an intensity of bitterness and hostility between the various races of this country, which is not produced even by war. Secondly, we felt that without violence, there would be no way to open the African people to succeed in their struggle against the principle of white supremacy. All lawful modes of expressing opposition to this principle have been closed by legislation, and we were placed in a position in which we had either to accept a permanent state of inferiority or to defy the government. We chose to defy the law. We broke the first law in a way which avoided any recourse to violence when this form was legislated against, and then the government resorted to a show of force to crush opposition to its policies, and only then did we decide to answer violence with violence. Nelson fucking Mandela, the man who fought against the apartheid state of South Africa, which was a vehemently racist country until 1990s. The apartheid of South Africa ended in 1994, 30 years ago. Many millennials were alive when South Africa was still an apartheid state. Racism is not gone in this world. And violence is sometimes a necessity. By the way, free Palestine.
There's a tall woman who had a difficult journey here. I asked her to tell me about life on the outside.
I know who you mean.
There's more. The evacuees mentioned something. A call to action.
You ever notice that core figure of this whole racism subplot was never named?
Those horns will be useful. They'll let you communicate with faraway animals so you can tell them how you feel.
Stop developing characters after the fact!
Because of how I looked. But luckily, your dad stood up to those awful people for me. He said my horns were beautiful and that they should...
Nope. I'm done. Goodbye. That is sexist and racist. Goodbye. I admit, saying it's sexist is a bit more of a stretch. But given this show's history, and the fact that moment was also racist, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say, doesn't fucking matter. That it was only mildly sexist and in a different context probably wouldn't have been as bad. The entire idea of a woman needing a man to defend her, fundamentally rooted in the idea that women are weak by nature, both physically and emotionally, and in this context, it's not even the biological difference, it's the emotional difference here. And then in terms of racism, Imagine this with a black person.
People were mean to me because of how I looked. But luckily, your dad stood up to those awful people for me. He said my horns were beautiful and that they shouldn't laugh.
Imagine someone saying that about a black person's skin. That's not fighting against racism, that's fetishizing a person's appearance. Imagine telling racists that they shouldn't make fun of a black person's skin color because look at how pretty the skin is. You know, that nice chocolate brown color, that nice delicious almond look. You know? I'm watching the rest of this episode at double speed because I genuinely can't fucking tolerate this. This is absolutely egregious. Goody! We get another episode of it. That was one of the worst episodes of television I think I've ever watched. A bad episode for the story, or bad visuals, bad sound design. That's all bad. A blatantly racist episode is an entirely separate fucking problem. Why the fuck do they show Hagakure in full there? How about you wait until you show her in the story? Not a translucent version of her, the full fucking thing. We saw her face. We saw a translucent version of her face. That's not anything. That was the longest I have spent on a single episode. Even Mushoku Tensei pales in comparison. It is really hard for me to... Yeah, no. I can't continue right now. That will massively worsen my opinion of every episode following this. If I take a bit to have a break and just move on, I'll be somewhat more charitable with stuff than I would be right now. That was... If one of your 6 depictions of racism across the entire course of the story involves a person of the non-discriminated group standing up to defend someone who can't do anything themselves, if that's one of the 6 fucking times you show discrimination, go fuck yourself. And... once again, I definitely need to address that so many writers have no understanding at all of what racism actually is. Racism is not beating people up and mocking them for their appearance. Racism is a deep-rooted belief of inferiority and superiority. It is believing that black people are inherently more dangerous. They're inherently more driven to crime. They're inherently more likely to not go very far in life. That they're less educated. That's racism, not just punching someone for being black. Racial discrimination is something you aren't even aware you're doing. Much like how privilege is everything you have that you don't even think about. Privilege is everything you aren't aware you have. And discrimination is very similar. It's every bias you don't know you hold.